Today, I am sitting in the attic of one of our historic buildings. It's called the Doctor's House or the Vierling House for Dr. Vierling. One of the reasons why we chose this location is because we've just published 2 articles in the American Alliance of Museums blog, both of them outlining the last 4 years of our institutional change and innovations, and the second part is related to our COVID responses in the last 12 months. So both of those articles are really about behind the scenes. It's not about walking down Main Street and seeing the beautiful buildings and kind of feeling the beauty of the historic district. It's really about kind of the behind the scenes stuff that you don't normally see, the structure that keeps Old Salem and the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts, or MESDA, alive. So that's really the kinds of questions that I'd like to answer. You can ask anything. We're running on almost all of the social media platforms. Ask your questions and I can get to them. So I don't want to take up too much time with my introduction. My friends here who are with me are going to filter the questions and I'm ready. Let's go. What a question to start this off with. It really hits to the core of what we've been doing for the last really 4 years. It's going into our 5th year. I think, to be quite honest, any organization that has survived through the last 12 months of the COVID pandemic needs to seriously think about what they will be when they grow up after the COVID pandemic. And this has really given us a great period of pause. We have a 21-person leadership team, which has been meeting nonstop every week, most of the time, twice a week, doing analysis and review of not only the COVID crisis, but also deeply reflecting on our operations, what Old Salem has been in the past, what we'd like Old Salem to be in the future. So my really simple answer is, yes, it's a time of pivot. I actually personally believe that it should be a time of pivot for all of our nonprofits, for all of our cultural organizations. In particular, I think given the social justice issues that are going on right now, the election that we've just gone through, the expansion of education and narratives, the financial conditions that are happening internationally, nonprofits need to be very active and proactive in the moves that they're making. So the answer is yes, this is a time of reflection and there will be changes when we do come back on board. The second part of that question is, when will we actually open? That is a little more complicated because as a living history site, we have such a level of costs to operate that being open just a little bit still costs us the total amount. So we really are looking at a stepped return. We know that not all of our visitors will return back right away. And I think this is generally true with most culturals and museums. 78% of our visitation and revenue at Old Salem and MESDA come from school groups. And we know the school groups are not going to be coming back this year. Most likely, it won't be until probably fall of next year, 4th quarter of next year. So our stepped return needs to take that into consideration because it just doesn't make financial sense nor really educational sense to open up when nobody will be able to come and visit. And educationally speaking, what's needed are all of the digital platforms that we've been working on, and we can talk more about that. So little long-winded answer to your question, but it's not a simple answer, and you really can't compare cultural nonprofits with others because the financial systems that they operate within really vary. It's actually kind of an easy one for me. It's the Mitch House. The Mitch House is one of the first buildings built. It's not the absolute first, but it's a small building, and it really speaks to the idea of settlement, colonization. There's lots of narrative that still needs to be talked about how architecture and buildings in Salem were really elements of colonization, and this small Mitch house really speaks to all those kinds of ideas. The Activate Main Street initiative, which is outlined in one of our articles, really came about from crowdsourcing visitor comments back in 2016 and 17, where they were kind of mentioning that they felt like the visitor experience was a little stale, that the buildings really didn't seem engaging, that their landscape really didn't seem to be what they were expecting. And so we formed what we now call the Activate Main Street Initiative, where we're really concentrating and folding back all of our attention, our preservation and our visitor engagement, all of that on Main Street, Church Street, into the historic district, so that when a visitor comes, that there's a really kind of focused, concentrated view of what you get when you get to visit us. And so the Mitch House is smack dab in the middle of our Activate Main Street initiative.
Thanks, Frank. We have a question from John Brown. He asks, when it comes to issues of racial and cultural diversity and progressive curatorial and historical practice, American museums and living history sites have often been more of a follower than a leader. How is Old Salem affecting and influencing real change and opening people's eyes to alternative modes of interpretation and display, and which programs show this commitment?
You know, it's not that Old Salem and Mesda excluded talking about marginalized narratives. In our case, we're talking about the indigenous native peoples, the enslaved narrative, and later freedmen, African Americans. Those narratives were told at Old Salem, but part of what we've been doing in the last 4 years is really concentrating on that research. And we started something called the Hidden Town Initiative. And in that initiative, we established an entirely new level of research, which is headed by Martha Hartley, our Director of Moravian Research, with a whole team of researchers and interns from universities from all over. And so in that research, our goal is to fully integrate throughout the entire district who the enslaved were, what their names were, as much biographical information as we can find. We're going lot by lot by lot, and that information, as we find it, are being placed on boards, and we're calling them Hidden Town text panels, and they're being placed by the front doors and in particular spots throughout the entire district. As our research grows, which it's growing every day, we feel no problem with going in, taking down that Hidden Town board, rewriting it, adding the new information, and putting it up. We're most particularly interested in naming individuals, finding out histories, and including those narratives in our already established narratives that we tell. So John, to answer your question, it's really the Hidden Town project that's encapsulating our new ideas of expansion of the narratives. Now, in addition to the Hidden Town project, just this year, actually, right before COVID hit, we started a Cherokee Advisory Committee, realizing that the relationship of the native peoples was very important to the town of Salem. And even though that story was told, it wasn't told at the depth that we wanted to tell it. So this newly established advisory committee is doing just that. And you'll slowly start to see those stories start to equal the stories that we tell of the white Moravians, of the enslaved Africans who lived here and worked here, and then also the native people. So one thing that you should feel is that both Old Salem as a history site and Mesda as a decorative arts museum are in a new way absolutely dedicated to researching authentic scholarship, accurate narratives, and placing those narratives throughout the entire site. So when you come to visit, you don't just go to one spot. You get that information everywhere that you go. Thank you for that question.
Frank, how has COVID affected the financial situation at Old Salem and Mazda?
That's a trick question. And I think, if you asked any president and CEO of any nonprofit or museum, they would kind of roll their eyes because it's just been so dramatic. We closed on March 12th, so almost 12 months. The first thing that I asked was for our COO and our controller to do a worst case scenario budget. In that worst case scenario budget, we determined that we had the possibility at the end of 2020 to have a deficit of somewhere between 3.2 million and 4 million. So that's a deficit. Now, Old Salem and Mazda has a line of credit, which we use as a way of keeping our cash flow even throughout the year. That, combined with what we already had in the line of credit, would exceed the line of credit. So we knew right away that our long-term operations couldn't sustain a $4 million deficit. So my answer is, dramatically it has affected our finances. But what did we do in response to that worst case scenario budget? I go into great detail in the article, the COVID article on the American Alliance Museums, but with that worst case scenario budget, we determined how open we could be and in what ways we could engage our community, that even though it would produce a deficit, we knew in order to remain active and dedicated to our surrounding community, it was going to cost us money, but it was an open conversation with our 21-person leadership team. And so we accepted some level of deficit so that, for instance, we could call back our bakers, and that we've been continuously baking bread for local families in need for the last year. I think we're over 6,000 loaves of bread. Also, we very quickly transformed all of our demonstration educational gardens into vegetable gardens. We have, I think, produced over 3 tons of vegetables for local food banks. We were again able to bring back our horticulture and gardening team. So in choosing to serve our community, we were able to kind of absorb back some of our staff that had temporarily been laid off. So financially speaking, it hasn't been great. It hasn't been great for any of us listening right now, but we've done a lot to keep ourselves afloat, and we feel very secure in working forward that the size of the organization will not exceed the money that we have to run it. I hope that answers your question.
We've got a question here from Maria. She's wondering if we have a target date of when Salem Pathways may launch, and maybe you can also just tell everyone a little bit about what Salem Pathways is.
The truth is, Salem Pathways was supposed to launch in June of last year. What happened is that this new program, which really is accessed through your smartphone. So individually, in the exterior of the historic district, we are highlighting 8 new individuals that weren't normally highlighted in their narratives, and it goes back to the Hidden Town Project and the Cherokee Advisory Committee, and also really trying to be having gender parity in our narratives. We're highlighting several females that weren't normally highlighted. And so those characters, through the smartphone, you get to kind of choose your character and walk throughout the district. And it tells you history, and there's music, so it's a really interesting, engaging project. Well, as COVID got worse and worse and worse, we decided to not launch Salem Pathways. Well, I have to say that we're getting very close to being able to launch Salem Pathways. I would easily say within a month we'll be able to do that. Our hope is over the summer we're really going to be able to launch it. We're really looking forward to it because it's an entirely new, innovative form of kind of program educational initiative that we've been doing. And so fingers crossed, it'll be very soon. Thanks for asking about that.
Frank, we had someone ask about the group that came together to make these changes. Can you talk a little bit more about the leadership team model?
It may seem like a subtle shift, but Old Salem really used to operate from a very small senior executive team, maybe 3 or 4 people. And part of our rethinking the organization 4 years ago was to expand. So instead of it going from top down, we inverted it. We now have, instead of maybe 4 senior executives, we have a team of 21 people who talk about everything from policy making and benefits to all of the COVID responses that we've been dealing with. And so it may seem subtle, but what it does is it allows every individual within the division to be represented in the higher level policy making. And this broader collaborative leadership model is very much a part of our equity initiative. We also decided 4 years ago that we wanted to strongly move in the direction of being a people-centered organization. And the way to become a people-centered organization was to put us people in charge of the organization. And so that 21-person leadership team, not only are we much closer friends now, we all know what each of us are doing. And it has absolutely affected how collaborative our operations are. So I talk more about that in the articles, but I would say it's a major shift in how I personally, and certainly Old Salem believes, that nonprofits need to start operating. We need to believe in the people that are a part of the organization, and we need to believe in the people that are visiting the organization.
Speaking of people and the equity initiative, I have the chart up showing the wages. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the equity initiative was early on. It really started late 2016 and 2017. When I came and I took my position really in late December of 2016, I realized that the lowest paid workers at Old Salem were being paid minimum wage, the federal minimum wage of $7.25. That was startling to me. And one of the first things that we did is we started to look at all of the pay scales, all of the hourly rates. And so we also started to look at gender parity within the organization. So the equity initiative really was from top, including me, my salary, my responsibilities, all the way to the hourly part-time worker, and how those two work together to make an organizational culture. And so one of the things that we dedicated ourselves to doing was taking our baseline pay to at least a living wage in Winston-Salem. And a living wage in Winston-Salem, North Carolina is $10.75. Over 4 years, we've been able to bring our minimum wage up to $11.18, with the average hourly, I want to say it's maybe $11.45. We have more room to move. But I have to say our leadership team is very proud of our moves in doing that. And I also want to ping towards the board. Every year that I have been here, the board has agreed and approved on a budget that had a line item in it that went to increasing salaries for our baseline workers. So none of this kind of equity work could happen if it weren't one collaborative body, which absolutely includes all of our advisory boards and our staff.
I really like this question from Danielle. She says, I have loved the Instagram stories that the interpreters have presented. Will we see more of those?
Yes. One of the things that we have done is back in 2017, when I first came to Old Salem, with Capture Communications, we established a social media strategy. And part of that social media strategy was we were really going to dive in and be innovative. We were going to try new platforms. We were really going to humanize what is normally a kind of highbrow living history experience. And so one of the things we've been doing with our latest edition of hiring a manager of digital production and our communication strategy is we've really pushed our production quality and our professional level of those videos. You will absolutely see that all of our digital platforms, from Learning in Place to Seeds with Stories to our new preservation lab that will be opening up, all of these things will now have a very strong presence on the digital platform. That's not going to go away. And in fact, things like this will be kept because we believe they're too important for the larger community.
Thanks, Frank. Do you want to do a few quick rapid fires?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Is the water pump installed yet?
It is.
Oh,
Thank all of our people who worked on it, particularly Ben Masterson and our volunteers who have worked on it, and a lot of that was on social media to follow it, but it's really beautiful. And you know, it's awful COVID, but it has provided us some time to be able to spend on preserving and restoring things that we didn't have time to fix. And the pump is one example. That is an unfair question. It's like children, which one do you love the most? I tell all my daughters I love them all the most, unless they're all together. I can't answer that. What I can say is that both my husband and I find the most interesting things wherever we're visiting. So if it happens to be in Kentucky, I can promise you I'm going to find something that's really beautiful. And so it really is, at that moment, the beautiful jewels that we, as museum people, know we can find at these sites. So I can find them almost anywhere. There's so many great things.
When will the water damage visible in the 1784 tavern wall and roof be repaired?
You know, so for those of you that don't know the site, it's a really specific question, but a landmarked building, very important building. It's the Salem Tavern. It's where George Washington stayed when he came through Salem. It was restored, I want to say, mid-60s perhaps. And so there have been elements of that building from its creation that have been architectural details that have caused water problems. One of them is there's a dormer in the center, and the dormer was put on about 10 years after the building was built. So it's still old, but it was kind of inserted. There's lots of architectural detailing that has made water a problem in that building. And it very well can be that the water stains that you're asking me about are ones that have been there for decades and decades and decades. But if there is any more information about it, I promise you, we'll put it on this chat so that I'll get a good answer for you. Thank you for that.
Frank, let's get into a meatier one again.
Yeah.
What program that was created from the COVID pivot, in your opinion, has been the most beneficial and received the most positive response?
Good question. I would say, for me, you know, there's several layers because there's the educational layer. Right now, we have a series of really, I think, spectacular videos for Black History Month, although we tell this story year-round, but we in particular are telling stories. And Joel Cook wrote and is actually executing those. Those are of such high quality that it gives us a future to work on, but the stories we're telling on other social media platforms, like Things, through the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts, also Salem Presents, which was back in the summer and fall. All of these online programs are really just amazingly kind of chock full of really educational, interesting, and creative ideas. I would say, if you really pushed me, the new programming hasn't even fully appeared yet because we've been doing so much pre-planning. So stick around because I really honestly believe, and Salem Pathways is like the beginning of it, the new Old Salem, those things Learning in Place, which is our educational division. What it will be like when you come back to Old Salem, that will be spectacular, and I'm looking forward to that.
Frank, Sarah wants to know, what can you share regarding creating virtual programming for an organization that has as its core a physical location? Is it more like building a new, albeit virtual core, or an amplification of the physical place?
That's a really good question, a very good museum question. And I hope that we have a lot of museum people on here because, one of the things our leadership team has been wanting to do, and it's the reason why we really worked on getting those articles out, is all the work that we've been doing, we really want it to benefit all of our sites. We want everybody to get elevated. I think for us, what we're realizing 12 months later is that digital platforms have different constituencies. And so sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't. They don't invalidate the other platforms, and by platforms I mean literally coming to the site or watching TikTok. What they can do is they can work together. There are some people who come to the history site who are never going to watch TikTok. There are some people, and we have international viewers of our TikTok, are never going to be able to come to the site. So what it does do is it allows us to have a kind of granular understanding of the kinds of stories we can tell, the density of the educational material that we can tell on those different platforms, but it doesn't invalidate the others. It's like, you're at a party and you might have some appetizers. You get invited to a sit-down dinner and you're going to have a full dinner. There are different kinds of absorbing history. And so that's really my answer, is we're learning as we go, but we are learning that there's really kind of granular differences. But anybody can do them. You just learn as you go.
Frank, we're just now hitting 2:30, just so you know for your
Thank
time.
you.
We have a question here from Maria. She says, do you see bringing back music on the porch? The event was amazing.
Yes! How's that? No, we decided to do music on the Tavern porch, which is the same tavern that the other question was about with the water stains. So we loved music on the porch, and what it did was, remember me talking about Activate Main Street? Even in a COVID pandemic, we had tiny groups of 2 and 4 people, families, standing 12 feet apart in the street watching, and then we also did it on Facebook Live. And at that time, all of our performers were doing that work for us for free or for very low cost. It was very important for us to maintain some kind of active engagement musically. And so without question, we were going to have a separate holiday music on the porch, but as all of you know, COVID got worse in November, and our leadership team decided the safety of our staff and the safety of our visitors came number one, so we canceled music on the porch. But just like Salem Pathways and just like the future of Salem, those concerts will continue. And while I'm talking about that, I don't want to lose the fact that the year before COVID occurred, we just got a very substantial partner, and that's Muddy Creek Cafe and Music Hall. We love Muddy Creek. We can't wait for them to be able to come back. We were doing very successful folk and country concerts on site. We love Muddy Creek. We miss them, and so that will most definitely remain a part of our visitor experience. Music's important to us.
Speaking of the Tavern area, are there any developments on what will fill the old Tavern space or any plans?
Thank you for that question. Right before COVID, we were starting to interview architects to look at that building. Many of you who are local know that the building ended up being vacated because there were so many renovations that needed to happen. And one of the most important ones was making it ADA accessible for people with disabilities. One of our initiatives is Access Salem, and Access Salem is becoming really important for us to allow our visitors to be able to literally get inside buildings and experience them, as well as those with cognitive and other disabilities, having those open qualities about our visitor experience. Back to the Tavern. So before COVID shut us down, we were choosing an architect to do a total building analysis. It gets into the weeds, but we have real problems with most of the infrastructure, the HVAC, the lighting, the plumbing, the kitchen, the ADA, as I already specified. We have roofing problems. That building is owned by Old Salem, so it's not a minor thing, and what we don't want to do is put in another restaurant partner without us taking care of the building. So right now, there's no schedule for moving on that building. We estimate anywhere between $300,000 and $500,000 is needed for the restoration of that building. We have agreed it's a primary player in our Activate Main Street. It's a primary player in our visitor experience, and it's an important building historically. So all of that comes together to say it's on our radar. I just can't give you a date when we'll get a new partner in there and when that building will open.
Frank, we have a really important question here. Will employees who were laid off due to COVID be offered their jobs back? Can you talk about how difficult that whole process was?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I do address that in the article as well. And just this morning, we had a town hall with all of our staff, and we discussed this openly. Our 21-person leadership team had a very difficult time in determining what our steps would be financially and in terms of staff. We're also seriously talking about the size of the staff when we come back, the analysis of what that means for Old Salem in terms of long-term financial stability when we do open up again. We know that our Learning in Place educational team is changing its methodology of communicating our scholarship and our narratives. We don't know the size of that team. Right now, it's a core team of, I want to say, around 8. We had, I think, around 50 before. We suspect there will be less in interpreters at that time. The same question comes up with retail. We closed all of our retail in March when we closed the site down, of course, and then we promptly opened up an online store. Our online store is helping us with earned revenue, and it's also allowing us the opportunity to rethink the number of retail outlets in the historic district, which of course would have a direct impact on the number of employees. So I'm afraid I don't have a really specific answer. Just know that none of that was easy, and we're very conscious of talking about what the future of our staff looks like, the size of it, the expectations and responsibility of that staff with this notion of a new Old Salem. So I hope I've addressed that question. If I haven't, please ask another one in the chat and I'll try to be even more detailed.
Thank you, Frank. We had a question asking how long you would recommend a history, architecture, furniture nerd to visit Old Salem, but I want to kind of switch that question a little bit. For our history, architecture, and furniture nerds out there who can't physically come, what can they do with us online, and where should they look? What should they be doing right now?
Well, first of all, when you come to the site, we have a staff that is so incredibly available. You can have special appointments when we do open up. So you can go into the collections at Mesda, you can get guided tours in the galleries, all of those things. You can get special tours for Hidden Town. So you could spend several days in a traditional way. In terms of what you can do right now digitally, what we did when we closed is we started something called Study South. it's really our kind of hybrid operations model, and you can go on our website and see everything that is possible that's engaged with this Study South initiative. We've also determined that we're keeping this concept of Study South, and so you'll be able to, when we open in a partial way in a few months, you'll be able to make appointments one-on-one with curators to come into the museum for scholarship and academic study. So there really are two tracks. One of them will be most recent, which will be the partial, and then the other one is when we do open up, we're going to be open in a way that will allow you to have really, as close as we can, one-on-one relationships. So if you really want to look at some beautiful thing in the museum, we're hoping that we're going to be able to make those appointments and engage you in a very real, tactile, personal way.
Thank you, Frank. Can I ask you a few Mazda questions?
Okay, I'll do my best.
Great. Okay, so where can a person go to find quilts, textiles, or any other objects in our collection that maybe aren't on display?
Well, now, Daniel Ackerman and Johanna Brown, Johanna being the curator of the Old Salem collection, and Daniel is the chief curator. They're jumping up and down in their seats right now, I know. Almost all of that is online. They're actually one of the first decorative arts museums to push in getting a good bit of the collections online. So go to the Mazda website, or you can access it from the Old Salem website. It has its own tab. It's really easy to get to, and you can be up at 2:30 in the morning looking at any textiles you want or any of the pottery in the collections at Mazda or Old Salem. So there's plenty digitally for you to be able to access. And then, as I said, when we do open up, our goal is that you can really have a kind of personal engagement with those artifacts.
One other Mazda question here. Why don't we include the Deep South states in our Mazda collection?
Do you know, I got that before I even started the job here back in 2017. When the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts was started, it really just concentrated on the southern states that were the original colonies. And as those states grew through time, Mazda kept to its core. There has always been a sense that other states, Alabama and Mississippi, and as you moved west, certainly those states had important southern decorative arts involved with them, and I love and Daniel could help me with the map. You might want to put the link up, Daniel, on the chat. It's the map that shows the original states that kind of go out west, and it just takes the line straight out. That's kind of the area that Mazda took in, except when the states became states with different political boundaries, we excluded that stuff. Well, what's happening now is, and I think in the future, they will start to include other southern states, and I look forward to expansion of Mazda's program. And that does lead me to talk about the Mazda Summer Institute, which is really one of our signature programs. And every year they study different sections of those 7 states that are included in the Mazda mission. And it kind of goes from year to year. I think this year is Chesapeake that they're studying in the Summer Institute. So who knows? There might be a Summer Institute eventually that takes it farther west. So thanks for the question.
And Frank, we've just got a few more questions here.
Sure.
It's 2:40. Mm-hmm. What's the best part at working at a historical site or educational site? And this person wants to know if there was a lot of learning or training prior for you to work here, but maybe just thinking about Old Salem as an educational place. What's it like working here?
Well, I've always considered myself a lifetime student. And I think to work at a site like this, you really have to have a sensitivity of constantly learning. It's one of the reasons why I think the Cherokee Advisory research is so important. The Hidden Town Project is so important. The continued restoration work is so important. Things are constantly being found. and new names are coming up, and biographies are being written by Martha Hartley's Hidden Town Research. There are stories we don't know. Like, literally, they haven't been a part of the history books. No one told us about them. It doesn't mean they never occurred. It doesn't mean those stories don't exist. It just means the research wasn't done. That's the power for me in working at a history site and working at a cultural museum organization, is you are constantly open to new research and scholarship, and it's really wonderful to think you're going this direction, and there's a bit of research that all of a sudden takes you in this direction. I like that, and that's really the power of these sites. That and the great Moravian cookies that are made by our bakery, and the beautiful maple leaves in the fall as you walk down Main Street. There's some really wonderful things.
I completely agree
The
with that.
cookies are good too, you know.
The cookies are a big plus. I completely agree. Frank, what do you wish the public knew about Old Salem that is not often publicized?
Well, you know, I think my answer now would be quite different than it was 4 years ago. Because my answer now is, as we get that information, you're being told that information. 4 years ago, I would have said, I think that we're missing information about Native peoples. I think we're missing information about the enslaved and the freedmen. I think we're missing information about the females and their involvement in the growth of Salem. I think we're missing information about the Moravians that weren't the leaders of the organization, the more marginalized populations. But I think Old Salem in the last 4 years has really moved in a direction that not only keeps our core scholarship, but starts to add to it. And it's really just the way that these sites should grow. These sites are not nostalgic, finite entities. They, in fact, are living and growing places of scholarship and education. And none of us have a problem thinking that educational methodologies change, that we learn new things all the time. If I get a new book and I read it, I've learned something new. So why do we think that history sites or museums have to remain exactly the same? So for me, I'm happy to say, right now, when you come to Old Salem, you're going to hear up-to-date information as quickly as we know it. Thank you for that question.
Thanks, Frank. We have another great question here about, I guess you could say, things that are typically publicized or shared, institutional knowledge specifically. So Carol is wondering, well, first she says she's really impressed with your transparency, especially the videos where you walk around the district and kind of talk about what's going on. She's wondering, how transparent should museums and historic sites be?
You mean in terms of everything? You know, it's interesting because I think that museums and culturals have been really pushed in the last year, not only because of the COVID pandemic, but because of social justice issues, because of pay parity and gender parity issues, the Me Too movement. All of these important issues are, of course, finding their way in our living, breathing organizations. And so the only way to make sure that our organizations can adapt and change and be honest and self-reflective is to be transparent. So that's one reason why I started every quarter producing President's Updates. All of those updates, believe me, it's more information than anybody would want about Old Salem. They're PDFs on our website. You can go back 4 years and look at everything, the finances, the programming, restoration. They're not just annual reports made to look good. They really tell you if we have a deficit, or they really tell you where we are with our hidden town research. That kind of transparency, I believe, as president and CEO, is absolutely necessary to push our nonprofit organizations into a world of equality and inclusion that many are not right now. So thank you for that question.
Frank, we have a question here about staff. Allison wants to know, how long can Old Salem keep staff without reopening? So I guess the people who are still working right now.
Well, part of our worst case scenario budgeting and part of our analysis was just that. We did an analysis to see how long, given the staff size that we are at this point, and providing the level of community engagement that we talked about, which is the baking of the bread and the producing of vegetables for the food banks, and doing all of the digital work and all the scholarship and research. We actually pulled it out into a handful of years. It actually gave us a sense of relief to know that given the size that we are right now, that we could continue the level of community service that we're doing at the size that we are, if we continue to get the contributions as we are getting right now. So that should be very reassuring. This is not something that, in a number of weeks, the whole thing is going to collapse. In fact, one of the reasons why we didn't reopen is for that very reason. Our long-term goal was to keep Old Salem and Mesda available to the public for the long haul. And so if that meant that we pulled back a little bit financially and in terms of how we produced a visitor experience and pivoted to digital and pivoted with Study South, that would actually be better than only being able to open for 3 years and then being forced to close. So we're in a position which I believe has provided us with a long-term solid foundation.
A few people are asking, what's the best way they can support Old Salem right now during the pandemic?
Asking these questions are great because what it does is it keeps all of us informed. Communication is the number one tool for all of us. And, of course, financial contributions. But, even though I'm a fundraiser, I don't want anyone to give money to an organization if they don't truly understand what that organization is doing and you believe in what they're doing. I happen to believe that what Old Salem is doing right now with the Hidden Town Project, with the Cherokee Advisory Committee, with the new Learning in Place initiative, with the Study South, with Access Salem and making sure that our disability visitors have access, with our reintroduction of Activate Main Street, with our seed saving program, with our horticulture, with our community engagement efforts with bread baking and produce making for local food banks. I happen to believe that this organization is worthy of a contribution. And I am delighted to see a $10 contribution. I'm delighted to see $25 contributions. I'm also delighted to see six-figure, unrestricted contributions multi-year, which allow us to continue what we're doing for our community. So that's really where I'm coming from. I don't expect someone to give us money simply because we're a history site. I expect somebody to ask the questions you're asking today, and you determine whether or not you believe in what we're doing. And that makes me happy if I get that modest contribution from you. That tells me that we're going in the right direction.
Frank, how long do you plan on remaining being president at Old Salem?
I was hired with an initial 3-year contract. Also understand that when I was hired, as far back as 2008, Old Salem was running considerable deficits. In 2008, they had 226 employees and were running around $1.6 million in deficit. So they knew that there were real structural financial challenges. Even though the public didn't really see that from the visitor experience. The board that hired me knew that Old Salem and Mazda couldn't continue in the way that it was going. And it was really a 3-year contract. After 2 years, they saw the direction we were going was so positive, and they asked if I would sign another 3-year contract, which I did sign another 3-year contract. If you don't like the direction of Old Salem and Mazda, you can certainly contact the board. They haven't come back to me with another contract, but as far as I'm concerned, I think there are very few organizations nationally that have the possibility of being so supportive and dedicated to these important issues that I've gone over today. It would be hard for me to leave this organization knowing the kind of solid background for long-term growth, interest in social justice, community engagement, equity initiative, gender and pay parity. You're hard-pressed to find an organization that is this all in. And so I am all in as long as they want me.
Well, we're grateful for that. Frank, we have a long question here, and it's more of an idea, but Dan is wondering if we have any plans for engaging with other institutions, and by that he means some sort of creative collaboration with the interpreters. So he said, perhaps what if we did an 1800s letter writing campaign back and forth, or mailing things to each other, discussing important aspects of the past. That's a very creative, interesting idea. Can you talk about how we have collaborated with and worked with other institutions? And
well, I love that idea. It sounds like a great thing for TikTok as well. And I will say that, there's something on TikTok called a beef. We've got international history sites that we have a beef with. It's kind of like a virtual battle between them. These sorts of things are not only great for our emotional state, because we love the visitors, and none of us are getting that relationship with the visitors. But if we can start to overlap that with very strong educational content, and I go back to the Learning in Place videos, the things that we're doing with our Hidden Town project in terms of digital engagement, those sorts of things could be great video letters back and forth. And the Moravians took excellent records, and we have so many of their letters between one another. It would be really interesting to start a kind of Moravian international love letter campaign between history and cultural sites. So if you want to contact us, you might be asked to be in charge of that. Thanks for the idea.
Yeah, thank you so much. Frank, we only have 5 minutes left, and I want to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about Old Salem's future. Where do you see Old Salem a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Well, I wish I had all 21 of my leadership team sitting here with me.
I mean, I can put them up on the picture up on the screen.
Put them up. So that question is really to that of the Board of Trustees and the Mazda advisors. And when I came, I asked museum colleagues nationally. I think that number, I want to say we're up to 30-something, representing 17 different states. All of these people have been giving us ideas and concepts. Old Salem is being made better by the opinions and thoughts and direction and guidance of all of these people. And most tied to Old Salem is that 21-person leadership team. And so that's what we're doing right now. We're really looking at what Old Salem and Mazda wants to be in the next phase of our being. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to use history as our sole mission. That's built into who we are. It's not that Mazda is going to all of a sudden become a contemporary art museum. It's built into their mission. It's Southern Decorative Arts. It's just that the world is changing, and we want to be able to communicate with those around us in the ways that are best conveyed. So in many ways, the answer is I'll let you know, and if something doesn't work, we'll try something else. And if that doesn't work, we'll try something else. But that's really what our 21-person collaborative leadership team and our board of directors is about. It's about talking with each other, trying something, and making it work. We're starting to get a good idea financially what our footprint needs to be. Physically, what our footprint needs to be. How many buildings, how much land, what's the staff size, what's our endowment, and then how large our impact can be. So the goal is how to remain as functional and stable with the greatest impact. And without question, that has digital ramifications, and it has to do with staff culture and our ability to continue to hire absolutely incredibly qualified, good people to keep pushing our professional level higher and higher. So that's the future of Old Salem and Mesda. I can't tell you directly what that looks like, but I do absolutely believe that collaboratively, we're just going to keep getting better and better. Thank you for that kind of high-level question. It's nice to kind of maybe end it at that high level.
Any final words for the people watching?
Well, one thing is that you should be able to contact me directly through the website. If you have any thoughts or any ideas, please send them to me. You know, 4 years ago when we started to transform Old Salem and Mesda, we did it through crowdsourcing. I put on a costume and I had a broom. They made me a president's broom. And I literally would sweep the sidewalk from one end of the district to the other when we had 800 or 1,000 kids and visitors here. And I just talked with people. And I had my smartphone and I wrote those things down. And that's how we got to those core initiatives. You know, the day that I saw a 12-year-old in a wheelchair and he was in the sidewalk hot from the sun because he couldn't get into the building is the day I realized that we needed the Access Salem program. Tons of stories like that. So the only way that I can get there, the only way our 21-person team can get there is if you contact us. You let us know how you feel about things and we can talk about them. I can't promise it's going to happen. I can't promise your view is the direction we're going to go, but I can promise that it will be considered. And thank you. I'm so happy that you took even a small bit of your time to visit me up in the attic of the Vierling house. Thank you so much.